Hello and welcome back to 1874. It's time for a match reaction show as Villa fell to a 3-1 defeat in Paris against one of the best teams I've ever seen in my life. In all honesty, play against my football club. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by French football expert Jonathan Johnson to chat through the game. He's got a foot in both camps as well, so couldn't be anyone better to talk to than Jonathan. This show is, as always, sponsored by Luke Roper, and if you want to get 20% off everything Luke have to offer, then use the code TVV20 and you'll get your 20% off. Right, Jonathan, I mean, I don't actually know how you will feel this morning. As I said, you've got a foot in both camps. You and I haven't spoke at all. We're just going to have our chat now live on air on this podcast and see where it takes us. But as someone who is fond of both teams, first of all, how was last night?
Well, I can safely say that I woke up this morning a little less fond of PSG, obviously, but
You and me
it
both.
was a surreal experience for me. I mean, it was strange. Total disclaimer: I was in the PSG end, so that kind of made it even more weird and bizarre. But it was also really heartening to see Villa, performing at that level. And I think, sort of had the game ended 30 seconds earlier. We were coming back to Villa Park with a 2-1 deficit as opposed to 3-1. I think, many people's sort of mindsets and feelings ahead of the second leg would be completely different. I mean, I've seen a lot of different reactions, listened to what a lot of different people have said after the game, obviously hashed it out with family members as well. And it does feel like there was a lot of different takeaways from the game, both regarding sort of individual performances, but also collective as well. But I think the main sort of takeaway is that there are still people who do still believe that sort of Villa are capable of pulling it off in the second leg, and there are some people who have kind of written it off already. And I think you're always going to have those optimists and pessimists. I guess I would still class myself as an optimist. I still think that there is something for Villa to play for, especially an early goal at Villa Park, which I imagine will be rocking despite the deficit from the first leg. But it's so gutting because I think of the three goals, you can only really ask questions and criticize properly on the third goal. I do feel that from a Villa point of view, it was a little soft. With the first and second, I'm being totally honest, and that's putting my sort of PSG hat to one side. I'm not sure there's any goalkeeper in the world that is going to stop either of those two goals. I mean, they were just absolutely phenomenal finishes. But also those minutes when Villa were ahead after Morgan Rogers scored the opener, it was just incredible. That feeling to see Villa out there on the pitch, something that I'd never really thought would ever happen in my lifetime, and not only competing but to take the lead against PSG was just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you're right to talk about the first two PSG goals. You can't legislate for stuff like that, in my opinion. We all will have watched PSG across the two legs against Liverpool. Did not have their shooting boots on really at all. Played some wonderful football, quite similar actually to the football that they played last night. But there wasn't really an end product by and large. To pull out the first two goals that they've pulled out last night, just two just sensational, ridiculous strikes that, as you say, I don't think any goalkeeper in the world can do anything about either. That the first one from Doué is just a glorious goal. The whip and the curl he gets on it in off the bar, it's just a phenomenal strike. And the second one, Kvaratskhelia, his footwork was just absolutely sublime. So sometimes I think you do just have to hold your hands up and say, look, they've scored two brilliant goals. I agree with you on the third. That's obviously the huge kicker. There were two pivotal moments in that game last night. The first probably being the fact that Villa couldn't get to half-time ahead and conceding quite soon after they'd gone ahead in that glorious moment after Morgan Rogers scored. And the real kicker will be conceding in stoppage time. I think Emery rightly tried to play it down at the end of the game, but there's no doubting that it does hugely change the tide. It does leave Villa with an absolute mountain to climb in the second leg. I don't think I'm a pessimist. I don't think I'm necessarily a massive optimist with it either. I think I probably sit somewhere in the middle. But the tie is not over. If Villa score early on in the second leg at Villa Park, the game is very much back on, and the way Villa are playing at Villa Park and the way they play in general, I wouldn't rule that out. The second leg, PSG are going to come there and probably play exactly the same, and if they do, in all honesty, it'll be very difficult for Villa because quite simply, PSG are a better football team than Villa are, and they've got some ridiculous footballers that are just some of the best I've ever seen last night play against my team, as I said. But it isn't over, so I can see why people would be upset to lose. Obviously, we all hate Villa losing any game of football, but I do think just generally you have to hold your hands up and just say this PSG team is absolutely sublime.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that there needs to be an element of realism as well. If you take those two phenomenal goals out of the equation, or, keep one and then lose the other, we were so close to getting what was arguably, the objective for Unai Emery and the players, which was, staying in the tie, possibly losing by a goal, hopefully trying to sort of play to at least, come back with a draw. And then it sort of feels like it's really doable at Villa Park. And I'm not saying it feels like it's not doable now, but you look at some of the performances as well. It would have been a lot worse had Emi Martinez not made a handful of really good saves as well. I think that kind of flies under the radar. But I think it's really frustrating that there's some people who kind of watched the game and sort of felt like Villa underperformed or didn't really show that much. And I completely disagree with that, because I expected the Villa performance to be something like that. You can't leave yourself open, to allow a team like PSG to attack at will, because even when you're trying to avoid it, as we saw last night, PSG find ways to kind of force their way through. And it's, up against a team with that kind of firepower, it is really difficult to live with them. But the really good thing now, I think, about the second leg is it really forces Villa to come out of their shell, which was going to be the plan all along anyway for Emery to really try and come out all guns blazing at Villa Park, really play on the atmosphere. And I do think that, the Villa Park crowd is going to have a massive part to play in this second leg, because I think many PSG fans, and possibly PSG and the staff and players themselves, kind of think that they already have one foot in the semi-finals. And I think that the atmosphere, sort of the appetite that the Villa fans and the Villa players will show next week, will really surprise them. I think they're kind of thinking that this is maybe sort of done and dusted after an early scare at Parc des Princes. And I hope that that Villa are able to again get a fairly early goal, even earlier than they did last night. And really show that it's a completely different game, because it does feel like, with a bit of momentum on our side at home and potentially being able to wipe out one of those two goals fairly early on, it could be a completely different game. And I'm not sure that Villa did enough last night to really force PSG to have to get pragmatic and change things up. And if Villa can play the way that we know they can at home, then I really feel like it kind of feels like it's a little bit like an opportunity like we saw decades ago when we played Atletico Madrid at home with the famous Stan Collymore goal. And I just hope that we would have enough sharpness in front of goal to be able to take the chances that we didn't take that night. But let's see what the next couple of days hold in store. Obviously, it's a disadvantage for Villa going away to Southampton over the weekend, needing to sort of stay in the race for a top 5 finish in the league, while PSG get to rest. Maybe that's an advantage, because maybe PSG go a little cold ahead of the next game, while it keeps Villa, or gives Villa a chance to immediately bounce back. But it does, it does feel like, PSG really everything clicked into place for them after they got that opening goal. And it's not guaranteed that it'll be the case in the second leg, because we've seen this PSG side blow very hot and cold at times. And, when they're on form, as they were last night, it's really difficult to live with them. But there's no guarantee that all of those opportunities that they have, those shots that they take from distance, are going to fly in next week.
Yeah. What did you make of Villa's game plan? I thought the game plan was actually quite good, and I thought it was executed reasonably well. People will point to the possession and the fact that PSG did get a lot of shots away against us. But it's not like they were sauntering through on goal with ease, going one-on-one with the goalkeeper. They had a lot of possession and shots from range and whatnot. But I thought Villa were quite compact, and I thought maybe they fell out of this at certain points in the game, but I thought the distances were quite good between the defence, the midfield, and the attack. Everyone was dropping in, putting in a shift. I thought there were some good individual performances in there. I thought Martinez obviously made some saves, couldn't do much about any of the goals really. I thought Konsa was good. I thought Pau Torres had an excellent game, considering he's been out for so long, and that's only really his second game with the first team in a competitive game this year. I thought he was excellent. I thought John McGinn was Villa's best player. Real performance of leadership, heavy involvement in the first goal. Maybe the front players will be a little bit disappointed. I thought Rashford carried a threat. I thought Rodgers and Ramsey maybe struggled to get into the game a little bit, but it's difficult when you know you're not going to get too many opportunities to run with the ball. I imagine that psychologically it's different because you know that this might not happen again. So it's difficult. But I thought there was some good individual performances in there. And just because they lost 3-1, I don't think that means the game plan was bad. Literally, that last goal has killed them, because coming away with the 2-1 would have been a brilliant result.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't disagree with that at all. I think it was more or less the game plan that many of us expected, sort of playing on the Villarreal Bayern Munich shock from a couple of years ago when Emery was coach of Villarreal. I think many people were hoping that would kind of be the blueprint to success, and there were kind of elements of that in the Villa performance, or the way that Villa were trying to play. I agree with you. I think it's nice to hear that someone else saw what I saw on the pitch, and that McGinn, really, everyone. I think there was a lot of unnecessary criticism towards him. I personally really appreciated the hustle. I thought that he was working hard at times when, Villa needed somebody to step up, and it wasn't, obvious that, somebody was necessarily going to do that. I was really encouraged by the way that Villa looked once Onana came on. I think those 3 subs, it was actually really frustrating because they were ready to come on for what felt like an absolute eternity.
Yeah.
But finally got on about maybe 7 minutes after the change was initially sort of readied for impact. So, I liked what I saw from Watkins. I think that he looked really motivated and focused when he came on. So it's a shame that we kind of lost the best part of 10 minutes where we could have had that sort of making a difference. It does feel like right towards the end, that chance with Rodgers, where he went for the shot and instead could have held onto the ball and maybe looked for another teammate, that could have led to something really interesting. But, I'm not going to nitpick. Rodgers has been fantastic this season and obviously got the goal to go ahead on the night. The only disappointment slightly, and I'm not going to sort of dig him out for sort of his individual performance, because I felt like it was coming from the right place, but I do feel the Cash got riled a little bit too early with Kvaratskhelia, and that's what led to the booking and ultimately him being hauled off at halftime. Yeah. That was frustrating because I think he did adhere to what Emery was asking him to do, but as soon as you pick up that booking, you're walking a tightrope. I don't know if Cash was one of the players potentially on a suspension for the return leg, because I know there was a handful of Villa players who could potentially have been suspended if they picked up a yellow card. But that was a little bit frustrating. Disasi, I think, strengthened us in many ways in the defence for the second half, but also, I think it's a completely different dynamic when you change from somebody like Cash, who can give you an outlet going forward at times, to somebody who is very much defensive minded. But it does feel. I thought Kamara had a very impressive performance as well. And largely, the players did what Unai Emery asked them to do. I think Rashford, yes, it was frustrating, and it would have been frustrating for him more than anyone else, because there just wasn't the service that he would have really needed. I do feel like he came left a little bit too often for my liking, when I would have rather he was sort of in a fixed central position. But like I said, I think that was mainly down to the lack of service. It does feel like, at home with a bit more of the ball, hopefully, and an ability to hit the front foot fairly immediately, it could be a completely different game. And the other thing that I would say is, I've seen Emery and the way that he set his PSG teams up in the past for home games, especially sort of coming off of a first leg deficit, and he normally gets them to fly out of the traps. I mean, we know that anyway from what we've seen from his Villa side over the best part of the last couple of years now. But it does really feel like this is set up for Villa to come flying out of the traps and really chase this one. And as soon as they can potentially eat into that 2-goal deficit, there could start to be the doubts in the minds of the PSG players, and suddenly that semi-final berth that they seem to think is already theirs, could be in jeopardy.
You've touched on something there that I think is a really, really valid point, in that when Cash has obviously gone off and Disasi's come on, I think that's a bit of a blow to Villa, because I think what that did was, Disasi obviously is going to play more as a centre back, so that kind of rips up the pre-match plan that Villa have gone with. I've said previously, if you've got Disasi at right back, you've probably got to have a Leon Bailey, or you've got to have a Marlon in front of him to provide width on that side. You mentioned Rashford pulling out to the left. it probably meant that Rodgers had to operate a bit more wide than we would have wanted him to, with Disasi playing behind him. So it kind of felt like we were overloaded on the left, and then you've got Rodgers out wide on the right. He's not really where you want him. So I think the balance of the team in that second half was upset quite a lot. And PSG came out at the start of that second half and really went at Villa. And I think there was some adaptation time that Villa needed to kind of settle into their system, and they didn't get it at all. I mean, Emery's hands are tied to an extent because he hasn't got Garcia to bring on at right back. Marlon's not registered, and Leon Bailey's injured. So there isn't really anything he can do with that right hand side when he's felt he's got to make the call to take Cash off. But I did feel that disrupted Villa, and I felt that it left us quite lopsided, and those opportunities maybe they were gone in the second half because of the way we were set up.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And it does, I think it explains as well why sort of McGinn was so prominent in the game as well, because once you take Rodgers out of a more central position and once Rashford's going out wide, you kind of, it requires McGinn to sort of be driving through the middle in order to try and create those chances. I mean, I did feel for him when Kvaratskhelia sort of did him in with the nutmeg. I think that was really unwarranted. Unfortunately, of course it can, but I don't think McGinn deserved that for the heart that he showed on the pitch. But it does feel that unfortunately, that change did knock Emery's sort of initial game plan. And hopefully it's something that, doesn't have to factor into consideration in the next game, because obviously we know should Villa, advance to the semi-finals, all of the yellow cards are wiped. So I think that will also factor into the way that the players approach the game. They don't have to be as disciplined. I mean, obviously they need to avoid getting themselves sent off, but sort of the ones who are maybe walking a bit of a tightrope on a potential suspension, should they pick up a yellow card, that's not going to apply now, because they know that at the end of the game, any potential yellow cards are wiped out anyway. And also, there's no bigger incentive than getting to the semi-finals, because it's sink or swim now. And it does feel like it's going to require sort of Emery to cook up something really special and much more attack-minded, naturally, given that we'll be playing at home. And I see a few people in the chat sort of asking, sort of, would it be better with Konsa at right back? In some ways, yes, and in some ways, I'm not so sure, because I think that Konsa and Torres is the best central defensive pairing when both are fit. Obviously, you mentioned that Torres is still working his way back to full fitness, but he's just so important to the way that Emery likes to set the team up to play, and sort of his distribution of the ball, I think, is totally crucial. Sort of pairing Mings and Torres, I think, is kind of a non-starter, really, because both are essentially kind of the same player, but obviously Torres, in my opinion, with all due respect to Tyrone, not a notch above when it comes to distributing the ball. Maybe you could make an argument for Disasi as the right-sided central defender, and then Torres on the left with Konsa right back. But again, it gives you less of an attacking outlet when you're playing, on the right-hand side, and maybe means that you've got to, come up with a different attacking combination so that you do have that width to negate the defensive duties of the fullback. But also at the same time, I find it really interesting that certainly early in the game, when they were down my end of the stadium, looking at the way Villa were setting up defensively, you've got Kamara dropping into the back, and it's almost sort of a 5-man defense at times. And I don't think that we'll see that at Villa Park, because the onus is on us to really be on the front foot from the first whistle. But it does feel like it was half of an ideal tactical performance that was executed until, like you said, Emery's hands were tied by the yellow card to Cash.
From me, Thomas Hitzelsberger did the match of the day kind of Champions League coverage last night. I spoke to him this morning, and he said he was surprised in the second half that he felt Villa kind of came out, went a bit more attacking in terms of bringing Asensio on and just going that bit more attacking, maybe too early in the second half, and kind of trying to draw the match rather than sticking to what they were doing and sitting in. And we did feel more open in the second half, particularly when we went 2-1 down so early. Firstly, do you agree with that? And secondly, what kind of reception did Asensio get? And he didn't really get to impact the game, did he? We didn't really see much of him in that game, unfortunately.
No, we didn't, and that was a shame, because it kind of feels like it was, I'm not going to say it was pointless to send him on, but it didn't really serve to much except for Asensio just getting a very hot reception from the PSG fans. Obviously it wasn't at the same level as Emi Martinez, but he
No.
was roundly booed by the PSG fans. So no love lost there, and safe to say that I don't think there's too many PSG fans, despite his form with Villa so far, pining for Asensio's return. Now, would it have been different had Emery set up with Asensio playing from the start? Possibly. Maybe Asensio would have relished being, part of the starting 11 upon his return to Paris. We'll never know. He might find himself in the 11 for the return leg, but it does feel like, I can see what Hitzelsberger is getting at, but it also sort of within the first 5 to 10 minutes of the second half, like you said, there's no real arguing against the individual brilliance of Kvaratskhelia for the second PSG goal, and then suddenly all bets are off, because at that moment, when the teams went in at half time, there was a lot of trepidation in the PSG crowd. Like, all the fans around me sort of a bit surprised that the team had fallen behind. Obviously delighted that they gotten themselves back into the game just before the break. But it does really feel like that second goal, was sort of killed the momentum that Villa had been trying to build up again after conceding the equaliser. So, I do see the logic in arguing that maybe it was an attempt to go too attacking too soon. But equally, that got negated later on because it took us about 7 or 8 minutes to bring on 3 players, one of which was Watkins, and that sort of best part of 10 minutes could have totally changed the complexion of the game for us. Because at 2-1, maybe we end up going on and hunting for an equaliser as opposed to conceding the third.
Yeah, so I thought I kind of looked at the subs that were coming on. Maatsen obviously coming to play further forward than he normally does, Onana for Tielemans and Watkins for Rashford. At that point, I feel like he kind of went against what Thomas was saying, in that that was the point he decided, right, I'm going to kind of firm this up a little bit. If we get a chance on the counter, brilliant. But bringing those players on, that kind of showed me at that point I'm quite happy actually with 2-1, and he went away from chasing it. So it's annoying that when he did that, and I think he made that decision, that we then conceded that third goal. Could we have done anything better for that third goal? I just thought we looked so tired at that point of the game. Players looked like they were running on fumes, to be honest, because it's so hard to play a game like that. You can't switch off for a second. You're not seeing much of the ball. You're having to think about keeping your shape and all the little jobs and instructions you've got and sitting in shape. Like, you maybe not necessarily doing as much running, but the mental fatigue, I thought the players just looked dead on their feet, really, at that point.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I see the logic in taking Tielemans off because, to your point, he's played so many minutes this season, he needs a breather every now and then. But I did feel a little bit frustrated that he was coming off when Onana was coming on, because I did feel like Onana, given his build, could be an aerial threat should we get the right kind of set piece to deliver. And we actually had one potential set piece where I think Onana gets his head on it and he goes into the side netting. And I did just wonder sort of if we had Tielemans standing over the set piece instead, could we have worked that any differently? That's not to say it was the wrong decision. Like I said, Tielemans has looked exhausted at times this season. It's incredible the way that he's managed to play so many games without, touch wood, having any physical problems that have kept him out for too long. But it's, I think with the third goal, when you concede in that kind of manner, especially when you compare it to the first and second goals, maybe, it's sort of, being able to look back with hindsight, you could say that, it's another goal that you can't really argue against either, but it feels like it was more preventable than the first two. And that's, because of just the astonishing nature of the first two being just individually brilliant goals.
Yeah, I focus very much on the PSG front three and midfield three in the lead up to the game, but I've got to say, they've probably got the best pair of fullbacks in Europe as well. You've got to say, with Hakimi and Mendes. I was thinking at one point, why not swap Rodgers and McGinn over and get Rodgers on the left and McGinn on the right, both obviously operating as 10s, but why not try that? But then I just realised, well, you can put Rodgers on the left and he's still going to be coming up against Hakimi, who's ridiculous as well, because in the Champions League games I've seen, people are getting very little change off Mendes at left back. Just quite simply another ridiculous player, and then he pops up and scores that pivotal third goal as well. And I think we could see with Luis Enrique's interview after the game as well, he knew that third goal was massive. He was delighted the way they celebrated that third goal. I think you're right. That kind of, I think they think maybe they've done the hard part now, and obviously they have, and maybe they're thinking towards the semi-finals now. Do you still? Where do you sit? I said that I don't think I'm a pessimist and I'm not an optimist. Where do you sit now with this second leg for Villa?
I mean, I guess I'd be qualified as an optimist. I wouldn't say that I'm, a massive pessimist. I do try and be as realistic as possible. And I said before the two legs played out, ultimately, I think that PSG would advance narrowly. But I hope that Villa would give them a good game, home and away. Obviously, I went for it. I actually predicted a 2-1 PSG win for the first leg, so it wasn't that far off. So obviously, it's a huge it's a huge blow to have conceded that goal in the final minute of the game. But I don't think it's impossible. I mean, we all know, the power of big European nights at Villa Park, and they don't become much bigger than this. The atmosphere is going to be absolutely crucial, as I was saying earlier, and really anything can happen. Sort of, if you look at the way the first half hour went in Paris, and then the fact that we managed to open the scoring, imagine how the first half hour could be at Villa Park, and if we can again be the first team to score, this time playing at home with a bit more momentum, a bit more attacking impetus, it could be a completely different game. I think whoever gets that first goal, and PSG will want to be the ones who get it as well, no doubt, can suddenly either open up the tie completely or just kill it off. So, I'm really, really looking forward to how Emery not only sets the team up on the night, but prepares them through this weekend's game as well, in order to be in the best conditions possible to pull off what he needs them to pull off next week. And, also when people are sort of looking ahead to the game, I also think that part of the game plan, because it was PSG's game plan away at Liverpool, could even be to play for extra time and possibly all the way to penalties.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see Villa's lineup on Saturday again. I think you'll get some clues as to who's going to line up on Tuesday with the selection that he plumps for on Saturday. He might look to get some minutes into people actually on Saturday that he might want to use on Tuesday. I'm starting to think Maatsen will obviously play. I think Maatsen might play on Tuesday against PSG now. So does that mean that he gives him minutes at the weekend, or does it mean that he holds him back? I think there's going to be a few things that Villa look at ahead of that game. Watkins and Rashford, but I think we'll take a lot of clues from what he's going to do on Tuesday from the team that he picks on Saturday. Just quickly before we go, we didn't really talk about Villa going ahead that much. Obviously, you were in the PSG end when that goal went in from where you were sat. What did that away end look like?
Oh, massive silence descended on the home fans for a start, and then it was difficult to hear the Villa fans over the course of the match. And that's not digging out the Villa travelling fans, because whenever I've seen Villa playing in France over the last year or so, they've always followed fantastically and been very vociferous. It's just very difficult generally to hear the away fans at Parc des Princes. And I will say that it was a particularly special Parc des Princes atmosphere that was created last night, so it made it all the more difficult to hear the away fans. But there were moments where you could hear the Villa fans breaking into fine voice, and to see them in the away was basically opposite where the away crowd were. To see them explode with joy once we went ahead was just phenomenal. It's just that anticipation for when Tielemans pulled it back was just superb. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to celebrate with as much gusto as I would normally. But I do think that I probably gave myself away to the fans around me when Hakimi had that goal disallowed that went through Martinez. And my hand gesture of frustration, thinking that PSG had gone 3-1 ahead prematurely. I think that possibly gave the fans around me a clue that I wasn't actually there for PSG. So it was short-lived, but honestly, the feeling, I was discussing this with my family members who've made the trip over for the game as well after the match. Those minutes that we were ahead was just phenomenal, especially for us, having spent time in Paris, having gone to PSG fairly regularly, to see Villa leading at Parc des Princes, to see that score on the scoreboard was just an incredible feeling.
Yeah, for 4 minutes or so, it was dreamland. Everything was good with the world, wasn't
But
it?
it just came out of
4 minutes.
nowhere, the Doué goal as well. I mean, you literally you just saw him pick up the ball, and then suddenly the next minute it's in the back of the net.
You referenced the Atleti game all those years ago, 1998. What wasn't it? The Atleti game wasn't dissimilar to Stan Collingwood's goal actually in the second leg, was it? Was it really? It was quite similar because I was the same as you. When it was 2-1, I was thinking Villa lost 2-1 to Atleti in that first leg in 1998 and took them back to Villa Park. But unfortunately, Christian Vieri, I think it was, scored really early for Atleti. So Villa had a
No, I think it was Caminero. Was it
who was
not
it? Oh,
Caminero?
my memory's let me down there.
So I
Christian
remember
Vieri is playing.
it
Is he
was it
playing?
was I know he was playing for Atleti.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure he was involved in both legs, but I'm pretty sure it was Caminero who got the
I
goal,
think
and
you might be right.
he had a. I don't think I can use such foul language on this podcast, but yeah, he had a pretty unique performance. Let's say he wasn't the toast of Brum after the final whistle. That's for sure.
No, so I was thinking at 2-1, it could be quite similar to that game where you're chasing something because that Athletic game is one that stands out in my mind. Villa won on the night. They obviously just needed that next goal to take it to extra time, and it didn't come despite them going very close. But that's one of the best atmospheres I've ever heard at Villa Park, and I was thinking it was set up to be a little bit like that. But then, of course, PSG scored the third goal. But I'm sure it won't affect the atmosphere, and I'm sure that the atmosphere will still be electric next week. And we've got a chance, and I suppose that's all you could ask for. Quite easily, actually, the way PSG played, you could have been coming away with an absolute hiding last night in the second leg, having nothing riding on it at all. Villa did well to stay in the game at times and not lose their shape and lose the discipline because, as I say, it must have been a really hard night for the players. Right then, Jonathan, thank you ever so much for joining me. Thanks to those that have joined us live as well. If you do go on to watch this on YouTube, then give the video a like, leave a comment and subscribe with your post notifications on. And if you're listening via Apple Podcast, a 5-star review and a nice review would be very, very kind of you. Spotify, 5-star review and a comment on this episode. That would be very much appreciated. I'll be back tomorrow for a preview of Southampton against Aston Villa, so watch out for that. And Jonathan will be back on the channel next week with some stuff around the Aston Villa PSG second leg, of course, as well. So have a great rest of your Thursday. Don't be too down. It's Champions League quarterfinals at the end of the day. We've just played an exceptional team. Losses can happen. Villa were up against some fantastic players last night and they held their own. So be proud of the players and look forward to the second leg. And only one thing left to say: up the Villa.